dear friends of ancient tales and lovers of Greek mythology. Welcome back to this peaceful corner where the stories of gods and heroes unfold like gentle dreams. Tonight, we journey together into the realm of divine messengers and magical artifacts, where the boundaries between heaven and earth dissolve like morning mist. High above the sleeping world, where clouds drift like silent ships across an endless sea of stars, there dwells a figure wrapped in moonlight and shadow. The night wind carries whispers of his name through olive groves and over marble temples where priests tend eternal flames. Hermes, the swift-footed messenger, the guide of souls, the bringer of dreams, moves between the realms with a grace that makes even the proudest eagles envious of his flight. Before we begin our journey into this timeless tale, if you enjoy these quiet voyages through ancient myth, feel free to subscribe to Greek Myths for Sleep and leave a gentle like. It helps these stories reach others who seek the same peaceful rest that you do tonight. Let your breathing slow now. Let your thoughts settle like leaves upon still water as we step together into a world where gods walk among mortals and magic shimmers in every ray of starlight. The birth of Wonderin, the time before time, was measured by mortal hands, when the world was young and the boundaries between dream and waking were as thin as spider's silk. There lived in the halls of Olympus a child unlike any other. This was Hermes, born of Zeus the thunderer and Maia of the lovely hair, a goddess who dwelt in a cave upon Mount Cyllene, where the mountain mists gathered like soft wool around the peaks. From his very first breath, this divine infant showed signs of the extraordinary destiny that awaited him. The cave where Maia made her home was a place of profound peace, hidden from the searching eyes of jealous Hera and the other dwellers of Olympus. Here, crystalline water dripped in a rhythm as ancient as the earth itself, each drop adding its small voice to an endless lullaby. The walls sparkled with veins of silver and gold, catching and holding the light of stars that found their way through cracks in the stone ceiling. It was in this womb of the earth that Hermes first opened his eyes that held within them the spark of mischief and wisdom that would characterize all his days. The moment of Hermes' birth was marked by signs and wonders that even the oldest of the gods would later recall with amazement. As Maia brought forth her divine child, the mountain itself seemed to sing, a low thrumming that resonated through stone and earth, reaching down to the very roots of the world. Flowers that had never before been seen bloomed spontaneously around the cave entrance, silver blossoms that chimed like bells in the breeze, golden blooms that glowed with their own inner light. The nymphs of the mountain, drawn by this miraculous flowering, gathered in wonder, their voices joining in a wordless song of celebration. Even as an infant, barely hours old, Hermes possessed a restlessness that spoke of journeys yet to come. While his mother slept, exhausted from bringing forth this divine child, The baby god slipped from his cradle with movements as silent as shadow. The moonlight that filtered through the cave entrance seemed to beckon him, calling him out into a world vast and full of wonders. His tiny feet, which would one day wear the most famous sandals in all mythology, carried him soundlessly across the threshold and into the night. But before he departed on his first adventure, young Hermes paused at the entrance of the cave, turning back to look at his sleeping mother. In that moment, with wisdom beyond his hours of life, he wove a spell of protection around the cave. He gathered moonbeams in his infant hands, spinning them into a net of light so fine that mortal eyes could not perceive it. This barrier would ensure that no harm could come to Maya while he explored the world beyond. It was his first act of magic, performed with an instinctive understanding of divine power that would only grow with time. The music of creation, the world that greeted young Hermes, was bathed in silver luminescence. Every blade of grass wore a crown of dew that caught and held the moon's radiance like tiny fallen stars. The trees swayed in a breeze that seemed to carry the very breath of the cosmos, their leaves whispering secrets that only divine ears could comprehend. As the infant god wandered, his path lit by Selene's gentle glow, he came upon a sight that would change the course of his divine existence and provide him with one of his most sacred attributes. There, moving with the slowness of ages across the sandy shore of a hidden cove, was a tortoise. Its shell gleamed like polished jade in the moonlight, each segment a perfect geometric harmony that spoke of nature's inherent artistry. Hermes watched, fascinated, as the creature made its patient way toward the water, leaving behind a winding trail in the sand that looked like the written language of the earth itself. In that moment, with the wisdom that comes naturally to gods, Hermes saw not just a humble creature, but an instrument of divine music waiting to be born. The creation of the first lyre was itself a magical act that drew the attention of all nature. As Hermes worked, his infant fingers moving with skill that defied his apparent age, the very elements seemed to pause in recognition of what was being born. The wind stilled, holding its breath. The waves upon the shore quieted their eternal conversation. Even the stars seemed to lean closer, their light growing brighter, as if to better illuminate this moment of creation. With hands that moved with preternatural skill, the infant god crafted the first lyre from the tortoise shell, stretching strings made from sheep gut across its hollow chamber. But these were no ordinary strings. As Hermes touched them, they became infused with the essence of music itself. Each string held within it a different aspect of cosmic harmony. The first sang of joy and celebration, the second of love and longing, the third of wisdom and contemplation, the fourth of sorrow and loss, the fifth of courage and adventure, the sixth of peace and rest, and the seventh, most magical of all, sang of the connections between all things, the invisible threads that bind the universe together. When he plucked the strings for the first time, the sound that emerged was like nothing the world had heard before. It was the sound of wind through mountain pines, of waves upon distant shores, of a mother's lullaby, and a lover's sigh, all woven together into harmony, so pure that even the stars seemed to pause in their eternal dance to listen. The music rippled outward from that hidden cove, touching all who heard it with a sense of wonder and possibility. Sleeping birds stirred on their branches, their dreams suddenly filled with new songs. The flowers turned their faces toward the sound, blooming more fully, as if the music itself was a kind of sustenance. The first great adventure but Hermes' nocturnal adventures were far from over. The music of his new instrument had awakened within him a hunger for experience, for the taste of adventure that would forever mark his divine nature. His infant feet carried him swift as thought across the landscapes of ancient Greece, over hills where wild thyme released its fragrance into the night air, through valleys where streams sang their own quiet songs to accompany his journey. He moved with a speed that defied his infant form, as if the very air parted before him in recognition of his divine heritage. As he traveled, Hermes began to understand the nature of the world he had been born into. He saw the threads of fate that connected all living things, visible to his divine sight as golden strands stretching between hearts and souls. He witnessed the dreams of mortals rising like smoke from their sleeping forms, each dream a story waiting to be told. He heard the conversations of the night, creatures the owls discussing philosophy in their ancient tongue, the wolves singing histories of the hunt, the crickets keeping time with their endless percussion. It was in a distant pasture, where the grass grew thick and sweet, that Hermes came upon the sacred cattle of Apollo. These were no ordinary beasts, but divine creatures whose hides shone like burnished bronze in the moonlight, whose breath was sweet as honey, whose lowing was like distant thunder rolling across the heavens. They grazed peacefully, unaware that they were being observed by eyes that sparkled with divine mischief. Each of these cattle bore upon its flank a mark of the sun, Apollo's own seal, and their horns were tipped with gold that never tarnished. The cattle themselves were magnificent beings, each one possessed of an intelligence far beyond that of mortal beasts. They knew the names of all the stars and could predict the weather by the way the grass bent beneath their hooves. Their milk, when given freely, could heal any ailment, and their hides, should they ever be shed, would make armor impervious to any weapon. They were, in essence, living treasures, and Apollo guarded them with all the jealous fervor of a god who understood their true value. Apollo, the golden god of music and prophecy, treasured these cattle above all his earthly possessions, and they were guarded by his watchful gaze, even from afar. But on this night, Apollo's attention was elsewhere, perhaps composing verses to the dawn that was still hours away, and his cattle stood unprotected save by their own divine nature. The god of music was in his sacred grove, lost in the creation of a new hymn that would celebrate the turning of the seasons. His golden lyre singing under his fingers as he sought the perfect melody to capture the essence of time's passage. The cleverness of God's Hermes, with the cunning that would one day make him the patron of thieves and merchants alike, devised a plan as clever as it was audacious. First, he surveyed the pasture with eyes that missed no detail. He noted the patterns the cattle followed in their grazing. The leader of the herd, a great bull, whose horns seemed to capture and hold moonlight, and the way they communicated with each other through subtle movements of ear and tail, understanding that these were no ordinary animals that could be simply led away. Hermes knew he would need to employ all his infant cleverness. He began by befriending the cattle, approaching them with the same music that had charmed all of creation. Playing soft melodies on his lyre, he wove spells of trust and companionship. The cattle, despite their divine nature, found themselves drawn to this strange infant who spoke their language, and whose music reminded them of the celestial harmonies they sometimes heard in their dreams. Even the great bull, suspicious by nature and protective of his herd, found himself lulled by the enchanting sounds. Next, Hermes fashioned shoes from bark and leaves, but these were no simple coverings. Into each shoe he wove magic. The bark came from trees that had never known an axe, leaves from plants that grew in the shadow of temples. He whispered words of concealment and confusion into each bundle, charging them with the power to mislead and misdirect. When he tied them to the hooves of 50 of the finest cattle, the tracks they would leave would tell a story that existed more in the realm of riddle than reality. But the true genius of his plan lay not just in the physical misdirection, but in the metaphysical. Hermes understood that Apollo's connection to his cattle was not merely one of ownership, but of divine resonance. Each morning, Apollo would sense his cattle through the spiritual bond between them, feeling their contentment as they grazed, their health and wholeness. To truly steal them, Hermes would need to temporarily sever this connection without alerting Apollo to its absence. With a wisdom beyond his hours of life, he drove them backward along the path, so that their footprints would seem to lead in the opposite direction from which they traveled. But more than that, he created false trails that led in multiple directions, some ending at cliff edges, others disappearing into rivers, and still others seeming to ascend into the very sky itself. Any tracker, mortal or divine, would find themselves confronted with a puzzle that defied logical solution. As he led the cattle through the night, Hermes sang to them songs of adventure and freedom. He told them stories of places they had never seen, of islands where the grass grew blue as the sea, of mountain peaks where the stars could be plucked like fruit, of valleys where time moved differently, and a day could last a year or a year pass in a day. The cattle, enchanted by these tales, followed willingly, their divine intelligence engaged by the promise of experiences beyond their pastoral existence. A journey through mystery all through the night he guided them. This infant god, whose power was already manifesting in ways that would have amazed even the Olympians, had they known. The journey was not a simple one, for Hermes led them by paths that existed between the mortal and divine realms, roads that appeared only in the corner of one's vision and could be walked only by those who understood the secret geometry of the cosmos. They passed through groves where the trees grew downward, their roots reaching toward the stars, and across bridges woven from moonbeams that spanned chasms of pure darkness. At one point in their journey, they encountered the river Alpheus, who recognized the divine cattle and would have raised an alarm. But Hermes, thinking quickly, played a lullaby on his lyre that caused the river god to fall into a deep sleep, his waters becoming still and mirror-like. The cattle crossed on a bridge of their own reflections, leaving no trace of their passage, while Hermes whispered a promise to the sleeping river that he would one day repay this involuntary assistance. The stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time in their ancient patterns, while below them a god-child led divine cattle through landscapes touched by mystery and moonlight. They passed by sleeping villages where dogs, sensing something divine in the night, raised their heads but did not bark, recognizing in Hermes a power that demanded respect rather than alarm. They skirted the edges of sacred groves where nymphs danced in the darkness, the tree spirits pausing in their revels to watch the strange procession pass. When at last they reached the vicinity of his mother's cave, Hermes hid the cattle in a grove sacred to the mountain spirits, where they would graze on ambrosia-touched grass and drink from streams that flowed with water blessed by the nymphs. But first, he performed one more act that would cement his reputation for divine audacity. Selecting 2 of the cattle, he invented the art of sacrifice, creating the first burnt offering to the gods, yet in a twist that showed his complex nature. He divided the meat into 12 portions, honoring all the Olympians, including himself, thus declaring his own divinity and his place among the immortals. The smoke from this first sacrifice rose into the night sky, carrying with it prayers and promises that only the gods could understand. It was a bold statement from one so young, a declaration that he was not merely the child of Zeus, but a power in his own right. The other gods, sensing this offering, stirred in their sleep, their dreams suddenly filled with the image of a divine infant whose precocious power promised great changes to come. The dawn of consequences as dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with colors like the inside of a shell. Hermes returned to his cradle. He wrapped himself in his swaddling clothes with the same care he had shown in all his nighttime activities. And when Maya awoke, she found her son sleeping peacefully, looking for all the world like any innocent babe who had never stirred from his bed. But the light in his eyes, when they opened, held depths of knowledge and experience that no mere infant should possess. Maya, with a mother's intuition, sensed that something had changed in the night. The cave seemed different somehow, charged with an energy that hadn't been there before. She noticed that her son's hands, though clean, carried the faint scent of adventure, a mixture of night air and starlight, of grass and moonbeams. When she lifted him from his cradle, he felt heavier somehow, as if he had gained not physical weight, but the weight of experience, of divine purpose fulfilled. She sang to him, as she had planned to do from his birth, old songs that her mother had taught her, melodies that reached back to the beginning of time. But Hermes, instead of simply listening, began to harmonize, his infant voice finding counterpoints that transformed her simple lullabies into symphonies. Maya realized then that her son was no ordinary godchild, that his destiny would be unlike any that had come before. Meanwhile, as the rosy-fingered dawn spread across the sky, Apollo rose to greet his sacred duty of bringing light to the world. His first thought, as always, was of his beloved cattle, and he sent his divine awareness to check on them in their pasture. What he found, or rather, what he didn't find, sent a shock through his golden being that caused the sun itself to flicker in the sky. The cattle were gone, vanished as completely as if they had never existed. Divine fury and investigation, the theft of Apollo's cattle, could not long remain hidden from the all-seeing eyes of the Olympians. When Helios drove his chariot across the sky that day, he observed all that occurred below, and it was he who informed Apollo of the strange absence of his beloved herd. But even Helios, who saw all that happened beneath the sun, was puzzled by the contradictory tracks and impossible trails that surrounded the empty pasture. Apollo's rage was terrible to behold. His radiance blazed with such intensity that flowers wilted in his presence, and streams dried at his approach. The very air around him shimmered with heat waves of divine anger, and mortals who glimpsed him from afar fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the intensity of his fury. He searched high and low, following the confused tracks that led nowhere, questioning every shepherd and nymph who might have witnessed the theft. His investigation was thorough and methodical, befitting the god of reason and order. He examined every hoofprint, analyzed the direction of bent grass, even tasted the soil to detect any lingering essence of his stolen cattle. He consulted with Pan, who knew every goat path and hidden trail in Greece. But even the god of wild places was baffled by the contradictory evidence. He spoke with the wind spirits, who reported seeing cattle walking backward through the air, an impossibility that only deepened the mystery. Apollo questioned the river gods, each of whom told strange tales. Alpheus spoke of a dream of music, so beautiful he forgot his own name. Peneus mentioned cattle reflections without cattle. Aeacus swore he saw hoofprints appearing in his waters that disappeared before they could sink. The testimonies painted a picture of an event that defied the natural order, a theft that was equal parts crime and cosmic jest. It was through his prophetic powers, those gifts of foresight that made him the patron of oracles, that Apollo finally discerned the truth, sitting in his sacred grove at Delphi, where the vapors rose from the earth carrying visions of past and future. Apollo entered a deep trance. In this state, he saw through the veils of misdirection that Hermes had woven, penetrating to the truth beneath. The vision came to him in fragments at first, an infant's laugh, the sound of a lyre, cattle walking on air. But gradually, the pieces assembled themselves into a coherent whole. In a vision clear as spring water, he saw the infant Hermes, saw the backward-driven cattle, saw the cleverness that had made a mockery of his divine protection. But more than that, he saw the divine nature of the thief, recognized in Hermes a power that was new to the cosmos, a god of boundaries and connections, of communication and cunning. This recognition did not diminish his anger, if anything. It intensified it. For now he knew that this was no random act, but a deliberate challenge to his authority. The march to justice with speed that rivaled the wind itself, Apollo flew to Mount Cyllene, his golden hair streaming behind him like a banner of flame, his eyes burning with righteous fury. His chariot, usually used to pull the sun across the sky, now served as his vehicle of justice, the divine horses breathing fire as they galloped through the air. Behind him, the day grew dim, for in his anger, Apollo had abandoned his duty to bring light to the world, leaving Helios to manage the sun's journey alone. When Apollo burst into Maia's peaceful cave, the contrast between his blazing presence and the cool shadows of that sacred space was like the meeting of sun and moon. The very stones of the cave began to glow with reflected heat, and the crystalline water that had dripped so peacefully began to steam and hiss. Maia, startled from her rest, clutched her infant son protectively. But Apollo's accusations rang through the cave with the force of divine certainty. He spoke of theft and trickery, of cattle stolen and honor besmirched, his voice echoing from the stone walls until the very mountain seemed to tremble. His words were not mere accusations, but divine pronouncements, each one carrying the weight of cosmic law. He detailed the evidence of his investigation, the testimonies of gods and spirits, the vision that had revealed the truth. His golden aura pulsed with each word, filling the cave with light that was almost too bright to bear. But Hermes, even then showing the silver tongue that would make him the god of persuasion and rhetoric, responded with wide-eyed innocence. He was but a babe. He protested wordlessly with gestures and gurgles. Born only yesterday, how could one so small and helpless have accomplished such a feat? His performance was masterful. He yawned at appropriate moments, reached for his mother with chubby fingers, even produced a few tears that sparkled like diamonds in the divine light. More than just acting, Hermes began to speak, and his words were like honey poured over marble, smooth and sweet, and impossibly persuasive. He spoke of the impossibility of an infant traveling such distances, of the physical limitations of his tiny form. He questioned the reliability of visions and dreams, suggesting that perhaps Apollo had been deceived by some other force, some enemy seeking to sow discord among the gods. He wove logic and emotion together into arguments so compelling that even Maya began to doubt Apollo's accusations, looking at her son with new wonder at his rhetorical abilities. The court of Olympus, yet Apollo would not be swayed. The matter was too grave, the theft too audacious to be dismissed. He insisted that they bring the case before Zeus himself, the king of gods and dispenser of justice. And so, with Maya carrying her swaddled son and Apollo striding beside them, still radiating indignation, they made their way to Olympus, to the golden halls where Zeus held court among clouds that served as his throne room floor. The journey to Olympus was itself a wonder. They ascended not by earthly paths, but by roads of light and air, where each step took them higher into realms where mortal foot had never tread. The air grew thin and pure, filled with a music that was the harmony of the spheres, the eternal song that the cosmos sings to itself in its endless dance. As they climbed, they passed through layers of reality, each more refined than the last, until they walked on paths made of crystallized starlight and breathed air that was the distilled essence of eternity. They were not alone in their journey. Word of the conflict between Apollo and the infant Hermes had spread through the divine realms, and other gods joined their procession, eager to witness this unprecedented case. Athena came, her gray eyes bright with interest in this display of infant cunning. Ares arrived, hoping perhaps for conflict. Hestia appeared, concerned for family harmony. Even Poseidon rose from his ocean depths, bringing with him the smell of salt and the sound of distant waves. Eagles soared below them, and above, the dome of the sky seemed close enough to touch, its blue depths holding mysteries that even gods could only guess at. The palace of Zeus rose before them like a mountain made of gold and cloud, its towers piercing the very fabric of the sky. Lightning played around its peaks, a constant reminder of the power of its master. The great gates, guarded by the Houri, the goddesses of the seasons, swung open at their approach, recognizing the divine nature of all who sought entrance. Before the throne of Zeus, the cloud gatherer, the wielder of thunderbolts, sat upon his throne with a majesty that made the very air shimmer with power. His throne itself was a wonder carved from a single block of cosmic stone that had existed before the birth of the world. Inlaid with metals that had no names in mortal tongues, his beard flowed like storm clouds, and his eyes held the depth of eternity. Around him, the air crackled with potential energy, as if lightning might spring forth at any moment. When the small party entered his presence, even Apollo's blazing anger seemed to dim in respect for the father of gods. The great hall of Zeus was vast beyond mortal comprehension, its ceiling lost in clouds that occasionally flashed with internal lightning. The floor was a map of the cosmos, showing all the realms of existence, and as the gods walked across it, they tread upon stars and planets, seas and continents. The pillars that supported this impossible space were made of crystallized time, and within them one could see the flow of past and future. Zeus listened with the patience of mountains as Apollo laid out his grievance, detailing the theft with the precision of one who values order and law above all else. As Apollo spoke, illusions appeared in the air, showing the empty pasture, the confused tracks, the testimonies of witnesses. His words were passionate but controlled, the perfect blend of emotion and logic that befitted the god of reason. He called upon justice, upon the sacred laws that governed even gods, upon the respect due to property and position. The assembled gods listened with varying degrees of interest and sympathy. Some nodded along with Apollo's words, recognizing the seriousness of the transgression. Others seemed amused by the audacity of the theft, hiding smiles behind their hands. Hera, Zeus' wife, watched with particular interest, her expression unreadable as she observed this new son of her husband's displaying such remarkable abilities. The defense of the infant god then, it was Hermes' turn to speak. And here occurred one of the most remarkable moments in all the annals of Olympus. The infant god, carried in his mother's arms, began to speak with eloquence that would have shamed the greatest orators of any age. His voice, though high and childlike, carried notes of music that had never before been heard in those halls. The very air seemed to listen, and the eternal lightning that played around Zeus' throne quieted, as if to better hear these unprecedented words. He began not with denial, but with praise, honoring Zeus as the supreme arbiter of justice, acknowledging Apollo as his brother and the rightful lord of music and prophecy. This unexpected courtesy disarmed some of the tension in the room, creating a space for his words to be heard without prejudice. He spoke of the bonds of family, of the love between brothers that should transcend material possessions, of the greater harmony that united all the gods. Then, with skill that would have impressed Athena herself, Hermes began to weave his defense. He spoke of innocence and misunderstanding, of the confusion that must surely have overcome whoever witnessed a mere babe supposedly stealing cattle. He questioned not Apollo's honesty, but the reliability of perception itself, suggesting that in a world where gods could take any form, where reality itself was malleable, how could anyone be certain of what they had seen? He spoke of the honor of gods and the importance of evidence, of justice tempered with mercy. His arguments were so persuasive, his manner so charming, that even the stern-faced Hours who attended Zeus began to smile. He wove philosophy and poetry together, creating arguments that were as beautiful as they were logical. He spoke of the nature of property among immortals, questioning whether beings who lived forever could truly own anything in the way mortals understood ownership. The judgment of the King Zeus himself began to chuckle, the sound rolling through Olympus like distant thunder. For the king of gods recognized in this infant his own clever son. And more than that, he saw the potential for greatness that lay within this remarkable child. In Hermes, Zeus saw reflected his own nature, the combination of power and cunning, of strength and subtlety that had allowed him to overthrow the Titans and establish his rule over the cosmos. But Zeus was also just, and he knew that beneath Hermes' honeyed words lay the truth of Apollo's accusation. His divine sight penetrated all veils of deception, and he had known from the moment they entered his presence exactly what had transpired. Yet he also recognized that this theft was more than mere mischief. It was a declaration of divine identity, a young god's way of announcing his presence to the cosmos. With a wisdom that encompassed all things, Zeus delivered his judgment. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of cosmic law, each word reshaping reality to conform to his will. He commanded Hermes to return the cattle to their rightful owner, but his tone held no anger, only a paternal amusement that suggested he was not entirely displeased with his infant son's audacity. Yet even in this judgment, there was a note of paternal pride. For Zeus recognized that in Hermes he had sired a god whose cleverness would prove invaluable to Olympus in the ages to come. But Zeus' judgment went beyond the simple return of property. He spoke of the future, of the role this remarkable infant would play in the cosmos. He saw in Hermes the perfect mediator, the one who could move between all realms and all parties, bringing communication where there had been silence, understanding where there had been confusion. His words were not just judgment, but prophecy, outlining a destiny that would make Hermes one of the most important gods in the pantheon. The birth of friendship, the journey back to retrieve the cattle, became an opportunity for something unexpected, the forging of a bond between two divine brothers who had begun as adversaries. As they traveled together, no longer separated by anger and accusation, Apollo began to see in Hermes not just a thief, but a kindred spirit. Both were sons of Zeus. Both possessed talents that set them apart. Both understood the burden and joy of divine power. Hermes, for his part, showed Apollo the respect due to an elder brother, but also the easy familiarity that would characterize their relationship through all the ages to come. He told Apollo of his night's adventures, not boasting, but sharing, painting pictures with words of the wonders he had seen and the discoveries he had made. Apollo found himself laughing at parts of the tale, especially when Hermes described convincing the cattle that they were actually flying rather than walking backward. As they traveled, Hermes brought forth the lyre he had crafted from the tortoise shell. He had carried it with him, hidden in his swaddling. Another impossible feat that Apollo chose not to question. When he played it, the music that flowed forth was so beautiful that Apollo, god of music himself, stopped in his tracks. The notes seemed to capture the very essence of creation, the joy and sorrow of existence woven together in harmonies that touched even immortal hearts. The music was unlike anything Apollo had created with his own golden lyre. Where Apollo's music had the perfection of high art, Hermes' playing held the wild freedom of nature itself. It was the difference between a formal garden and a wildflower meadow, both beautiful, but in entirely different ways. Apollo found himself entranced, his anger completely forgotten in the face of this revolutionary sound. The great exchange Apollo had never heard such music. His own playing, masterful as it was, had always carried the formal perfection of classical art. But Hermes' music held something different, a wild sweetness, a freedom that spoke of wind through trees and water over stones, of the untamed heart of nature itself. As he listened, Apollo's anger melted away like snow before the spring sun. In its place grew a desire that only the lyre could fulfill, a need to possess this instrument and the music it could create. The exchange that followed was more than a simple trade. It was a recognition of mutual respect and complementary talents. Hermes offered the lyre freely, not as payment for his crime, but as a gift between brothers. With it, he taught Apollo new techniques, new ways of thinking about music that would revolutionize the god's art. He showed him how to make the strings sing like birds, how to create rhythms that matched the human heartbeat, how to weave melodies that could heal the sick and comfort the sorrowful. Apollo, in return, gave gifts that showed he understood Hermes' true nature. The golden staff he presented was no ordinary rod, but a symbol of authority that would mark Hermes as a legitimate god, not just a divine infant playing pranks. The staff would later become the famous caduceus, growing and changing as Hermes himself grew, eventually sprouting wings and attracting the two serpents that would become its most recognizable feature. More precious still was the knowledge Apollo shared the art of prophecy through dice and knucklebones, a form of divination more suited to Hermes' mobile nature than the formal prophecies of Delphi. This gift acknowledged Hermes as a god of boundaries and transitions, one who would need to see into the future to guide others safely through dangerous passages. The messenger's commission, but the greatest gift was yet to come. Zeus, watching this reconciliation with satisfaction, decided to honor his clever son with a role that would make use of all his unique talents. In a ceremony that all Olympus would remember, Zeus formally appointed Hermes as the messenger of the gods, the one who could travel between all realms, Olympus, Earth, and even the underworld, carrying the words and will of the immortals. It was a position that had never existed before, for the gods had always communicated through dreams and omens, through priests and prophecies. But Zeus recognized that as the cosmos grew more complex, as the relationships between gods and mortals became more intricate, there was need for a more direct form of communication. Hermes would be the living link between all levels of existence, the one who could translate divine will into mortal understanding and carry mortal prayers to divine ears. The appointment came with both privileges and responsibilities. Hermes would have access to all realms, able to cross boundaries that others could not. He would be inviolate in his person, protected by the law of heralds that made attacking a messenger the gravest of crimes. But he would also be bound by sacred oaths of neutrality and discretion, required to deliver messages accurately regardless of his personal feelings, to keep secrets that could shake the foundations of heaven and earth. To fulfill this role, Hermes would need more than mortal means of travel. The paths between the realms were long and sometimes treacherous, crossing spaces that existed outside normal reality. Some passages led through the void between stars, others through the dreams of sleeping titans, still others through dimensions where time flowed backward and causality was merely a suggestion. Without proper equipment, even a god could become lost in these between spaces, wandering forever in realms that had no names. The forging of Wonder Zeus himself commissioned Hephaestus, the smith of the gods, to create something special for his messenger son. The announcement was made in the great hall, with all the gods assembled to witness it. Zeus spoke of the need for speed beyond speed, for sandals that could carry there, where not just across physical distances, but through the spaces between reality itself. The commission was unprecedented. Never before had such an item been requested, for never before had there been a god with Hermes' unique responsibilities. Hephaestus accepted the commission with the grave dignity that characterized all his work. Though his body was twisted and his gait limping, his mind was perhaps the most brilliant in all Olympus, understanding the deep structures of reality in ways that even Zeus could not fully comprehend. He returned to his forge with plans already forming in his mind, visions of impossibility that he would make real through skill and sacred fire. In the forges of Olympus, where the very flames were fed by stardust and cosmic winds, Hephaestus labored over his creation. His workshop was a marvel that defied mortal understanding, a space that existed partially in Olympus, partially in the heart of volcanoes, and partially in dimensions where the laws of physics were more suggestions than rules. The walls were lined with tools that had no names in any language, implements that could shape not just metal, but concepts that could forge ideas into reality. The workshop of Hephaestus was a marvel in itself, built within a volcano that served as his chimney, its walls lined with tools that could shape reality itself. But this description barely captured the true nature of the space. The forge existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing Hephaestus to work with materials and energies that could not coexist in normal reality. In one corner, time moved at a different rate, allowing for centuries of tempering in moments. In another, gravity flowed upward, creating waterfalls of molten metal that fell toward the ceiling. The rhythmic ringing of his hammer on divine metal created a music all its own, a percussion that seemed to match the heartbeat of the earth. But each strike of the hammer did more than shape metal, it shaped reality itself. Each blow encoding into the sandals the laws that would govern their function. The sound carried throughout Olympus and beyond, and gods and mortals alike paused in their activities, sensing that something momentous was being created. Cyclopes assisted him, their single eyes gleaming with concentration, as they pumped the bellows that kept the celestial flames at the perfect temperature for working with materials that mortal hands could never touch. These were not ordinary Cyclopes, but the elder ones, the brothers of the Titans, who had forged Zeus' thunderbolts and Poseidon's trident. They brought to the work knowledge that predated the current order of the cosmos, techniques from the time before time, when the universe was still learning what it wanted to be. The materials of divinity for 7 days and 7 nights, Hephaestus worked on his creation. The number was significant, 7 being the number of completion, of perfection achieved through effort. Each day was devoted to a different aspect of the sandals, each night to binding those aspects together into a harmonious whole. The work could not be rushed, for each component had to be not just crafted, but convinced to join with the others, to become part of something greater than itself. He used gold mined from veins that ran through the foundations of Olympus itself, gold that held within it the light of the first dawn. This was not metal in any sense that mortals would understand, but solidified divine essence, the stuff of which gods themselves were made. Each flake of this gold contained within it the memory of creation, the echo of the first moment when order emerged from chaos. Working with it required not just skill, but a deep understanding of the nature of divinity itself. He wove into the metal threads of silver drawn from moonbeams, caught in nets of spider silk during the dark of the moon. The process of capturing moonbeams was itself an art that Hephaestus had perfected over eons. It required waiting for nights when Selene turned her face away, when her light was at its most subtle and thus most powerful. The spider silk came from Arachne's descendants, spiders who spun their webs between dimensions, catching not flies, but fragments of possibility. The wings he crafted from feathers donated by the 4 winds themselves, each pinion containing the power of the storm and the gentleness of the breeze. Boreas of the north gave feathers of crystal and ice that could cut through the fiercest gale. Notice of the south provided feathers that carried the warmth of distant deserts and the promise of rain. Eurus of the east offered feathers that held the freshness of dawn and new beginnings. Zephyrus of the west contributed feathers, soft as evening and sweet as spring flowers. But the materials were only part of the creation. Hephaestus also wove into the sandals concepts and abilities that had no physical form. He hammered in the idea of swiftness itself, caught from the moment between lightning and thunder. He folded in the essence of boundaries taken from the spaces between dreams. He included a fragment of the cosmic wind that blows between the stars, carrying light and time in its invisible currents. The presentation, when at last the sandals were complete, they seemed almost alive. They were things of incredible beauty, with straps that appeared to be made of woven light and soles that gleamed with an inner radiance. But beauty was the least of their qualities. They hummed with barely contained power, and the air around them shimmered with possibilities. Sometimes, if one looked at them from the corner of one's eye, they seemed to be in motion even while staying still, as if they were eager to begin their eternal journey. The wings attached at the ankles were perfect in every detail, each feather articulated and able to move independently, creating patterns in the air that were themselves a form of communication understood only by the birds and the winds. They were not static decorations, but living parts of the sandals, capable of adjusting their configuration to match any need. In calm flight, they would spread wide and steady. In rapid movement, they would fold tight against the ankle. In battle, for even messengers sometimes must defend themselves, they could become as sharp as swords. The presentation of the winged sandals to Hermes took place in the great hall of Olympus, with all the gods assembled to witness this momentous occasion. The hall had been specially prepared for the event, with clouds arranged in amphitheater seating so all could see. The light was adjusted to best display the sandals' beauty, though no amount of staging could truly capture their essence. Even in the company of divine artifacts, Zeus' thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, Athena's aegis, the sandals stood out as something special. Hephaestus himself carried them forth, limping across the hall with a dignity that made his disability seem like a badge of honor rather than a limitation. He had dressed in his finest robes for the occasion, and his usually soot-stained hands were clean, showing the respect he had for his own creation. As he walked, he explained the sandals' properties, his normally gruff voice taking on the tone of a teacher or a proud parent. The first flight as Hermes fastened them to his feet for the first time, a transformation came over him. The change was visible to all who watched, not just physical, but metaphysical. He seemed to grow taller, more radiant, as if the sandals had unlocked some dormant aspect of his divine nature. His already bright eyes blazed with new intensity, and his skin took on a subtle luminescence. The very air around him began to move differently, creating gentle currents that had not existed before. When he took his first step, he found himself not walking, but gliding, his feet barely touching the ground. The sensation was indescribable, not just movement, but a fundamental alteration in his relationship with space itself. Distance became negotiable, a suggestion rather than a law. He could feel the threads that connected all places, could sense the shortest paths between any 2 points, even if those paths led through dimensions that had no names. With the second step, he was airborne. The launch was effortless, as natural as breathing. One moment, he stood on the solid floor of Olympus. The next, he was suspended in the air, supported by wings that moved in response to his thoughts rather than his muscles. The feeling of flight was intoxicating, not the crude flapping of birds or the mechanical hovering of insects, but something altogether more elegant, a dance with gravity itself. The flight of Hermes in his new sandals was a sight that even the gods would remember forever. He soared through the halls of Olympus, his laughter ringing like silver bells, leaving trails of golden light in his wake. His movements were pure joy translated into motion, loops and spirals, and sudden stops that defied the laws of inertia. He flew not just with his body, but with his entire being, and his happiness was so infectious that even stern Hera found herself smiling. He looped around columns of cloud, dove through rainbows, and ascended so high that he could touch the very dome of the sky. At the rainbow, he paused, running his fingers through the colors and watching them separate and reform, leaving his touch with hints of gold that would forever after mark the places where divine fingers had passed. The dome of the sky, when he reached it, rang like a bell under his touch, a deep note that resonated through all creation. Beyond physical flight, but the sandals were more than just a means of locomotion. As Hermes experimented with their capabilities, he discovered layers of function that even Hephaestus had not explicitly described. They were a symbol of Hermes' role as the connector of realms, the one who could traverse boundaries that others could not cross. With these divine sandals, he could move from the heights of Olympus to the depths of the underworld in the time it took to draw a breath. The sandals understood intention in a way that went beyond mere obedience. When Hermes thought of a destination, they would know not just the place, but the purpose, adjusting their route accordingly. If he needed to arrive with dignity, they would take a stately path. If speed was essential, they would fold space itself, arriving before the thought was fully formed. If stealth was required, they would muffle their passage, leaving no trace in air or ether. He could race the sun across the sky, and indeed, he challenged Apollo to such a race on that first day. The two brothers streaked across the heavens, Apollo in his chariot pulled by horses of flame, Hermes on his winged sandals that left contrails of starlight. They laughed as they flew, their divine rivalry transformed into joyous competition. Though Apollo's duty to bring the sun through its course meant he could not deviate from his path, Hermes flew circles around the chariot, demonstrating the superior maneuverability of his new gifts. He could dance with the stars in their courses, and that night he did just that. Rising to the highest heavens, he joined the eternal dance of the constellations, his sandals allowing him to match their complex movements. The stars, usually aloof from the younger gods, welcomed him into their patterns, teaching him the steps of cosmic dances that had been choreographed at the beginning of time. His presence among them added a new element to their dance, a quicksilver brightness that would thereafter be visible to those who knew how to look. The first official mission Hermes undertook in his new role as divine messenger was to carry Zeus' commands to the far corners of creation. Zeus had waited until his son was properly equipped before sending him on this inaugural journey, understanding the importance of first impressions. The messages themselves were carefully chosen, not urgent matters of state, but rather announcements of Hermes' new role, introductions that would establish him in the eyes of all divine and semi-divine beings. He flew to the edge of the world, where Atlas held up the sky, bringing words of encouragement to the Titan in his eternal labor. The journey to the world's edge was itself an education in the Sandals' capabilities. As he flew beyond the lands known to mortals, reality became increasingly flexible. The Sandals navigated through regions where direction had no meaning, where up and down were matters of opinion rather than fact. They carried him safely through the screaming winds that marked the boundary of existence, protecting him in a bubble of calm air. Atlas, when Hermes found him, was exactly as the stories described, a figure of immense power and immense weariness, holding the cosmos on his shoulders with a determination that was both admirable and heartbreaking. The Titan's eyes, when he managed to turn them toward Hermes without shifting his burden, held depths of experience that made even a god feel young. Hermes delivered Zeus' message words of recognition for Atlas' sacrifice, acknowledgement of his strength, and a promise that his labor was not forgotten. But Hermes did more than simply deliver words. With the compassion that would characterize his service, he spent time with Atlas, telling him stories of the world he could not see, of the beauty that his labor made possible. He described sunsets and dawns, the laughter of children, the growth of flowers, all the small wonders that justified the Titan's sacrifice. When he finally left, Atlas stood a little straighter, his burden perhaps not lighter, but more meaningful. The depths and heights he descended to the depths of the ocean, to converse with Poseidon among the coral palaces, where fish swam through halls of pearl. The journey beneath the waves required a different use of the Sandals' power. They created around Hermes a bubble of air and pressure that allowed him to survive in the crushing depths, their wings adapting to propel him through water as easily as air. The descent was a journey through layers of reality, as much as layers of water, the sunlight zone where normal fish swam, the twilight zone where creatures began to create their own light, the midnight zone where darkness was absolute, and finally, the abyssal depths where Poseidon held court. The palace of Poseidon was a wonder that rivaled Olympus itself, built from every treasure the sea had ever swallowed. Ship's gold formed the mortar between blocks of pearl, and the halls were lit by the phosphorescence of deep-sea creatures bound willingly into service. Poseidon received his nephew with the courtesy due to Zeus' official messenger, but also with the warmth of family. He showed Hermes wonders that few Olympians had seen: gardens of coral that sang in the currents, schools of fish that moved in patterns that spelled out prophecies, the great kraken that slept in the deepest trenches and whose dreams influenced the tides. He even ventured to the underworld, where his winged sandals allowed him to cross the river Styx without touching its cursed waters, bringing messages to Hades in his shadowy realm. This journey was perhaps the most perilous, for the path to the underworld was guarded not just by physical barriers, but by metaphysical ones. The sandals had to navigate the boundary between life and death, finding the narrow path that allowed a living god to enter the realm of the dead without being claimed by it. The river Styx, when he reached it, was more terrible than any story could convey. Its waters were not just cursed, but were curse itself made liquid, the distilled essence of every broken oath and betrayed trust. Even gods feared to touch it, for its waters could strip away divine power as easily as mortal life. But the winged sandals carried Hermes across without difficulty, their flight true and steady even in that atmosphere of despair. Charon, the ferryman, watched in amazement as the young god passed overhead, the first being to cross his river without payment or penalty. Discoveries and revelations in his travels, Hermes discovered that his sandals had properties even Hephaestus had not foreseen. They could become invisible at will, allowing him to move unseen when discretion was required. This invisibility was not mere transparency, but a deeper concealment that hid him from all senses, mortal and divine. When invisible, he cast no shadow, made no sound, left no trace of his passage. Even the fates, who saw all threads of destiny, could not track him when he chose to travel unseen. They never wore out, no matter how many leagues he traveled, and they always carried with them a faint scent of ambrosia that announced his divine presence. This scent was subtle but unmistakable, a calling card that could not be counterfeited. It reassured friends and warned enemies, marking Hermes as under the protection of Zeus himself. The scent would linger briefly after his passage, a sign to those who came after that the messenger of the gods had been there. Most remarkably, they seemed to understand his intentions, sometimes carrying him to destinations he had not consciously chosen, but where he was needed nonetheless. This prescient quality saved many lives over the ages. He would find himself arriving at disasters just in time to carry messages that prevented greater catastrophes, appearing at deathbeds where his presence was needed but not requested, standing at crossroads where important decisions were being made. The sandals, it seemed, were connected to the deeper patterns of fate itself. This connection to fate made Hermes invaluable to the other gods. When Zeus needed to know not just what was happening, but what was about to happen, he would send Hermes to fly the paths of possibility, following the threads of cause and effect to their likely conclusions. These flights through potential futures were dangerous, for it was easy to become lost among possibilities, to forget which timeline was real and which merely might be. But the sandals always knew the way home, always found the thread that led back to the present moment. The messenger's burden-as word of Hermes' efficiency and reliability spread. He became indispensable to the workings of Olympus. When Zeus needed to send warnings to mortals who had transgressed divine law, it was Hermes who appeared in their dreams, his winged sandals carrying him across the threshold between sleep and waking. These dream visitations required delicate work, for the human mind was fragile and could be shattered by too direct a contact with divinity. Hermes learned to moderate his presence, to appear in forms that conveyed the message without overwhelming the recipient. When lovers among the gods needed to send secret messages, they trusted Hermes to deliver them with discretion. The love affairs of gods were complex matters, often involving jealousies that could literally reshape the landscape if handled poorly. Hermes became adept at navigating these emotional minefields, delivering passionate declarations to Aphrodite without arousing Hephaestus' suspicion, carrying Zeus numerous romantic communications without alerting Hera. His sandals learned to muffle their sound when approaching jealous spouses, to leave no golden trails that might betray a secret rendezvous. When the seasons needed to be announced to the world, it was Hermes who flew from realm to realm, proclaiming the changes ordained by the cosmic order. This duty required him to visit every corner of creation, from the highest mountain peaks to the deepest ocean trenches, ensuring that all of nature knew when to begin the great transitions. He would wake the sleeping bears to announce spring, whisper to the trees that autumn approached, carry the news of winter to the migrating birds. The sandals made these vast journeys possible, allowing him to cover all of creation in the span of a single day. But perhaps his most solemn duty was as Psychopompos, the guide of souls. This role had not been part of Zeus' original intention, but it evolved naturally from Hermes' unique position as one who could travel freely between all realms. The first time a dying mortal saw Hermes approaching, recognized the divine messenger, and asked for guidance to the afterlife, Hermes could not refuse. From that moment, it became part of his sacred duties. The guide of souls in this role, his winged sandals took on a more solemn aspect. They moved silently, without the golden trails that marked his other flights, and they carried with him a gentle darkness that eased the fears of the souls in his charge. The sandals seemed to understand the gravity of this duty, adjusting their appearance to be less overwhelming. Their divine radiance dimmed to a soft glow that comforted rather than awed. He would appear at the moment of death, beautiful and terrible in his compassion, and with infinite gentleness, he would take the soul by the hand and begin the last journey. His appearance varied depending on the soul's expectations and needs. To warriors, he might appear in armor, honoring their courage. To children, he might take the form of a favorite uncle, someone trustworthy and kind. To the elderly, he often appeared as a fellow traveler, someone who understood the weariness of a long journey and offered companionship for the final steps. The path to the underworld was different for each soul, shaped by their beliefs and experiences in life. For some, it was a misty road through a forest of memory, where every tree held a moment from their mortal existence. These souls would often pause, wanting to relive cherished memories one last time, and Hermes would wait patiently, understanding that this review of life was an important part of letting go. He would sometimes point out memories they had forgotten, small kindnesses that had meant more than they knew, moments of courage they had dismissed as insignificant. For others, it was a river of stars flowing through the void, a journey that transformed the fear of death into wonder at the vastness of existence. These souls, often philosophers and dreamers, would ask Hermes questions about the nature of reality, about what lay beyond. He would answer what he could, his responses tailored to what would bring comfort without revealing mysteries that mortal souls were not yet ready to understand. Stories for the journey always. Hermes was there, his winged sandals finding the surest path, his presence a comfort in the face of the unknown. He would tell stories as they traveled, tales of heroes and gods, of love and loss, weaving words that made the journey seem less like an ending and more like a transformation. His stories were carefully chosen for each soul tales of reunion for those leaving loved ones behind, stories of rest for those who had labored hard, narratives of justice for those who had suffered wrongs. One of his favorite stories, told to souls who feared they had lived insignificant lives, was about the butterfly effect, how the smallest actions could have profound consequences. He would trace for them the ripples of their kindnesses, showing how a smile given freely had prevented a suicide, how a piece of bread shared had started a chain of generosity that fed hundreds, how their simple existence had been necessary for the grand pattern of the cosmos. No soul who heard these stories arrived at the underworld feeling worthless. In the underworld itself, Hermes was one of the few who could come and go freely. The winged sandals allowed him to traverse the 5 river Styx, Lethe, Acheron, Cocytus, and Phlegethon, without being affected by their various properties. Each river was a test that the sandals passed effortlessly. Styx's hatred could not touch them, for they were made with love. Lethe's forgetfulness could not claim them, for they remembered their purpose. Acheron's sorrow could not weight them down, for they carried hope. Cocytus' lamentation could not slow them, for they brought comfort. Phlegethon's fire could not burn them, for they were forged in flames far hotter. He could walk through the fields of asphodel, where the common souls wandered, bringing messages from the living to give meaning to their eternal existence. These messages were often simple a grandchild named after them, a recipe still being used, a story still being told, but they meant everything to souls who feared they had been forgotten. Hermes made sure no soul was truly abandoned, even if he had to compose the messages himself, drawing on his observations of the living world to create connections that brought comfort. The halls of the dead, his relationship with Hades and Persephone was unique among the Olympians. While others feared or avoided the rulers of the dead, Hermes was always welcome in their shadowy halls. He understood that Hades was not evil but necessary, that death was not an ending but a transformation, that the underworld was not a prison but a different kind of existence. This understanding, combined with his natural diplomacy, made him a favorite guest in the palace of the dead. He would bring them news from the upper world, particularly during the months when Persephone resided below. His visits during these times were especially welcome, as he would describe the world above in such vivid detail that Persephone could almost feel the sun on her face. He would bring her flowers that could survive in the underworld, special varieties that Demeter had created, that bloomed in darkness and fed on memory rather than light. These visits helped ease the tension between the upper and lower realms, preventing the kind of conflicts that could literally crack the earth. His visits were like rays of sunlight in that dim realm, and even Cerberus, the three-headed guardian of the underworld, would wag his tails when he heard the distinctive sound of those winged sandals approaching. Hermes always brought treats for the great dog honey cakes made by Hestia, flavored with ambrosia and wrapped in leaves from the gardens of Olympus. He would spend time with Cerberus, scratching behind all 6 ears, telling the lonely guardian about the dogs in the upper world, making him feel connected to his mortal cousins. The underworld changed because of Hermes' regular presence. He suggested improvements to make the realm less forbidding torches that burned with colored flames to mark different areas, gardens of shade-loving plants that could thrive without sun, gathering places where souls could share their stories. Hades, initially resistant to change, found that these improvements actually made his realm function better. Souls were calmer, less likely to try to escape, more accepting of their fate when the underworld felt less like a prison and more like a different kind of home. The evolution of duty as the ages passed, Hermes' role evolved and expanded. He became not just a messenger, but a mediator, a negotiator, a diplomat. When conflicts arose between gods, and they arose often, For immortals had eternal memories for grudges. It was Hermes who shuttled between the parties, finding common ground where none seemed to exist. His sandals would carry him back and forth tirelessly, sometimes making hundreds of trips to resolve a single dispute. One of his greatest diplomatic triumphs was preventing a war between Athena and Poseidon over the patronage of Athens. The competition had grown increasingly bitter, with each god's supporters among the mortals coming close to violence. Hermes flew between them countless times, carrying proposals and counterproposals, softening harsh words and emphasizing points of agreement. His sandals wore paths in the air between Athens and the sea, their passages so frequent that they created permanent wind patterns that sailors learned to use. Eventually, he proposed the solution that both gods could accept a public contest, judged by the mortals themselves. It was a risky proposal, putting divine pride at the mercy of human judgment. But Hermes presented it in such a way that both gods saw it as an opportunity to prove their superiority rather than a potential humiliation. The contest proceeded peacefully. Athena won with her gift of the olive tree, and Poseidon, while disappointed, accepted the outcome with grace, partly due to Hermes' careful management of the aftermath. The sandals also carried him on missions of mercy. When plagues struck mortal cities, he would race to Olympus to petition Apollo for healing. When droughts threatened, he would negotiate with Zeus for rain. When wars grew too bloody, he would whisper counsel of peace in the ears of generals. He became known as the god who cared, the one who would listen to prayers that other gods ignored, who would take action when action seemed impossible. Moments of joy, but it wasn't all solemn duty and serious business. Hermes retained the playful spirit of his youth, and the sandals were often employed in less grave pursuits. He would race with eagles for the sheer joy of it, his laughter echoing across mountain ranges. He would dance on cloud tops during thunderstorms, dodging lightning bolts in an aerial ballet that Zeus pretended to disapprove of, but secretly enjoyed watching. There were quiet moments too, times when Hermes would simply fly for the joy of flight. On nights when the moon was dark and the stars shone with particular brilliance, he would ascend to heights where even eagles could not follow. There, in the thin air between earth and void, he would dance among the constellations, his sandals leaving brief trails of light that mortals below would mistake for falling stars. In these moments of solitary flight, Hermes found a peace that eluded him in his busy life as messenger and guide. Sometimes he would visit remote places just to see them islands that no human had ever found, mountain peaks too tall for mortal lungs, deep valleys hidden in perpetual mist. The sandals took him to all these places, never tiring, always eager for the next discovery. He would often find wonders in these hidden places, new species of flowers that sang, waterfalls that flowed upward, caves where time moved differently. He would remember these places, and sometimes when a deserving mortal needed a miracle, he would guide them to these hidden wonders. He particularly enjoyed the aurora borealis and australis, flying through the curtains of colored light at the poles. The interaction between his divine sandals and the magnetic displays created new patterns, new colors that had never existed before. Sometimes he would spell out messages in the aurora for his fellow gods' private jokes that only they would understand, birthday greetings for divine celebrations, or simple, beautiful patterns that existed just for the joy of creation. The teacher and guide, as his reputation grew, mortals began to specifically invoke Hermes for guidance. Travelers would leave offerings at crossroads, asking for his protection on dangerous journeys. Merchants would pray to him before important negotiations, seeking his silver tongue. Thieves would whisper his name before difficult heists, hoping for a fraction of his cleverness. And Hermes, true to his nature, would help all who asked with genuine need, though his help didn't always take the form expected. For travelers, he might appear as a fellow wanderer, sharing the road for a while and offering advice that seemed casual but later proved life-saving. He would point out the safe path through the mountains, mention which inn had honest proprietors, warn about bandits in carefully indirect ways. His sandals, during these earthly visits, would appear as simple traveling boots, well worn but sturdy, giving no hint of their divine nature unless circumstances required a revelation. For merchants, his assistance was often more subtle. A favorable wind that brought ships to port just in time for market day. A chance meeting between buyer and seller who needed each other's goods. A sudden insight into pricing that benefited all parties. He taught that honest commerce was a form of communication, an exchange not just of goods, but of culture and ideas. Markets blessed by Hermes became centers of civilization, places where different peoples could meet peacefully and discover their common humanity. For thieves, his help was selective. Those who stole from greed received no assistance and might even find their plans mysteriously thwarted. But those who stole from desperate need, the parent stealing bread for hungry children, the slave stealing freedom, might find shadows deeper, guards distracted, locks mysteriously open. He understood that sometimes breaking human law was necessary to follow divine justice, though he always ensured that such thefts caused minimal harm to innocent parties. The patron of communication beyond his official duties, Hermes became the patron of all forms of communication. He inspired the first written alphabets, showing mortals how to capture speech in symbols. His sandals carried him to different cultures, cross-pollinating ideas about writing, ensuring that this powerful tool spread throughout the human world. He delighted in watching mortals discover that they could send messages across time and space through marks on papyrus or clay. He fostered the development of trade languages, simplified tongues that allowed merchants from different lands to conduct business. These languages, while lacking the poetry of native tongues, served their purpose in connecting diverse peoples. Hermes would often sit invisibly in markets, listening with pleasure as Greeks haggled with Egyptians, as Phoenicians negotiated with Celts, all using the common words he had helped spread. He also became associated with persuasion and rhetoric. Mortal orators would pray to him before important speeches, and he would sometimes touch their tongues with divine eloquence. But he insisted that persuasion be used ethically. Those who used his gifts to deceive or manipulate would find their words turning to ash in their mouths. True persuasion, he taught, was about finding common ground, about presenting truth in ways that others could accept and understand. The Sandals carried him to schools and academies where rhetoric was taught, and he would invisibly guide teachers toward better methods. He introduced the idea that listening was as important as speaking, that understanding your audience was crucial to communication. Many of the principles of effective communication that mortals discovered were actually gentle suggestions from Hermes, whispered into receptive minds during moments of contemplation. The wings of change. As human civilization evolved, so did the demands on Hermes and his winged sandals. Cities grew larger and more complex, requiring more sophisticated forms of divine intervention. Trade networks stretched across continents, creating webs of interdependence that needed careful maintenance. Wars became more devastating, requiring more active divine diplomacy to prevent total destruction. Through it all, the Sandals adapted, their magic evolving to meet new challenges. During the great age of exploration, Hermes found himself busier than ever. Ships ventured into unknown waters, caravans crossed uncharted deserts, and his protective presence was needed everywhere. The Sandals developed the ability to split their essence, allowing Hermes to maintain a presence in multiple locations simultaneously. He couldn't fully manifest in more than one place, but he could extend his awareness and protection across vast distances. He guided explorers to new lands, but also tried to moderate the encounters between different cultures. When civilizations met for the first time, he would work to prevent the misunderstandings that could lead to violence. He would inspire translators, suggest peaceful gestures, create opportunities for cultural exchange. Not all his efforts succeeded. Mortal free will and prejudice sometimes overwhelmed his subtle influence, but he saved countless lives through his interventions. The Sandals also began to resonate with human innovation. As mortals invented new forms of communication, signal fires, carrier pigeons, eventually written postal systems, Hermes would bless these enterprises. Mail carriers would sometimes find their burdens lighter, their paths clearer, their deliveries arriving at precisely the right moment. The Sandals seemed to recognize kindred spirits in these mortal messengers and would extend subtle aid to those who served communication. Modern echoes as the classical age gave way to new eras, As the old gods retreated from direct intervention in mortal affairs, Hermes adapted his methods. He could no longer appear openly as a god, but his influence continued. The winged sandals carried him through the dreams of inventors working on telegraphs and telephones, inspiring breakthroughs that connected humanity in ways previously unimaginable. He whispered in the ears of those developing the internet, guided the hands writing the first email protocols, stood invisibly present at the birth of social media. The sandals themselves evolved with the times, where once they had carried physical messages between gods and mortals. Now they carried ideas, inspirations, and innovations. They flew through cyberspace as easily as they once flew through clouds, ensuring that important messages found their recipients, that connections were made across vast distances, that the human need for communication continued to be served. Modern travelers still sometimes catch glimpses of Hermes, a helpful stranger at an airport who points out a faster security line and then vanishes into the crowd, a motorcyclist who appears on a dangerous mountain road to guide lost drivers to safety, whose bike seems to move with impossible grace, a delivery person who always seems to arrive at exactly the right moment with exactly what's needed. The sandals have learned to disguise themselves as running shoes, motorcycle boots, even inline skates, but their essential nature remains unchanged. The eternal flight hand now. As our tale draws toward its close, we find Hermes still flying, still serving, still connecting the disparate parts of creation. His winged sandals, despite millennia of constant use, remain as perfect as the day Hephaestus presented them. They have carried countless messages, guided innumerable souls, traveled distances that cannot be measured in any mortal unit. They have become not just tools, but symbols of connection itself, reminders that no part of creation exists in isolation. On this particular evening, as twilight paints the sky in shades of purple and gold, Hermes pauses in his eternal flight. He hovers above a world that has changed beyond recognition from the one he was born into, yet remains fundamentally the same in its needs and desires. Mortals still seek connection, still need guidance, still require the services of one who can bridge the gaps between different realms of existence. He can feel through his sandals the millions of messages flying through the air, emails and texts, phone calls and video chats, the constant chatter of a connected world. It makes him smile, this mortal recreation of what he has always done. Humanity has, in its way, given everyone their own winged sandals, the ability to send their thoughts across vast distances at the speed of light. Yet still, there is need for his services, for the human touch that technology cannot replace, for the wisdom that comes from truly understanding both the message and the messenger. Below him, cities twinkle with lights that rival the stars. In each light, he sees a story, someone working late to finish a project, someone calling a loved one far away, someone writing words that will change lives. The threads of connection are more visible now than ever, a web of light that encompasses the entire globe. His sandals resonate with this web, adding their ancient magic to the modern miracle of global communication. The promise of tomorrow as night fully claims the sky. Hermes prepares to resume his duties. There are dreams to deliver, inspirations to plant in sleeping minds, connections to forge between hearts that don't yet know they're meant to meet. The sandals flex eagerly, ready as always for the next journey. They have carried him through ages of myth and legend, through times of change and upheaval, and they will carry him into whatever future awaits. For those who would listen, Hermes offers this wisdom. Every message matters, every connection counts, every bridge built between souls strengthens the fabric of existence. We are all messengers in our way, all capable of carrying light from one heart to another. The winged sandals he wears are both unique artifacts and universal symbols, reminders that with will and compassion, we can all transcend our limitations and touch lives beyond our immediate reach. The moon rises full and bright, casting silver shadows across the landscape. In her light, Hermes' winged sandals gleam with renewed radiance, and with a leap that is both ending and beginning, the messenger god takes flight once more. He soars upward, becoming one with the night, his form dissolving into the darkness, until only the faint golden trail of his passage remains, a shooting star that carries wishes and dreams to their destinations. And now, dear listener, as Hermes continues his eternal flight, let your own thoughts take wing into the realm of dreams. Feel the gentle presence of sleep approaching on sandaled feet, bringing rest and renewal. The ancient stories live on in the quiet moments between waking and sleeping, in the space where consciousness yields to the deeper wisdom of dreams. May your sleep be peaceful, your dreams be sweet, and may you wake refreshed, carrying within you some small echo of the divine music that plays eternally in the halls of memory and myth. Perhaps in your dreams, you will hear the distant sound of wings, feel the brush of feathers softer than silk, and know that somewhere in the vast expanse between heaven and earth, the messenger still flies, still carries hope and connection to all who have hearts to receive it. The winged sandals of Hermes continue their flight through the corridors of time, and somewhere in the distance, between sleep and waking, between earth and heaven, between mortal and divine, they carry still their messages of connection and wonder. Rest now, wrapped in the comfort of ancient tales, and let the rhythm of those celestial wings carry you gently into the realm of dreams, where all stories begin and end, where gods and mortals meet in the democracy of sleep, where the boundaries dissolve, and all things are possible in the soft darkness of night's embrace. In the morning, when dawn's light touches your window, remember that you too have wings, perhaps not visible ones of gold and feathers, but wings of thought and word, of kindness and connection. Use them well, for in every message sent with love, in every bridge built between hearts, in every boundary crossed in the service of understanding, the spirit of Hermes lives on, and his ancient flight continues through the actions of all who choose to connect rather than divide, to communicate rather than remain silent, to carry light into darkness wherever it may be found. Sleep now, and let the stories carry you home.